or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to Fin Partners Climate and Sustainability Forum in partnership with One Business World, part of a week-long webinar series coinciding with New York Climate Week. Our webinar will focus on sustainable supply chains, the hidden frontier of climate leadership. My name is Terri Bloore. I'm a managing partner for corporate and financial services in London. My background is in developing corporate communication strategies for NGOs, MNOs and government bodies. I'm Deputy Chair of the London Chamber of Commerce Sustainability Committee and Co-Chair of the PRCA Sustainability Working Group. With me today, we have three leaders in climate action, circular economy, ethical sourcing and reporting. Adam Garfunkel, who is the Chief Impact Officer at Junxion, with over 25 years experience helping organisations deliver social and environmental strategies. Welcome, Adam. And we have Jay Gaines, who is the Chief Marketing and Content Officer at Worldly. Welcome, Jay. Jay leads global marketing strategies and the deployment of sustainable data insights in their day-to-day operations for customers. And last but not least, we have Nico Nicholas, who is the CEO of ZEERO GROUP. He's an entrepreneur and founder of Trees for Travel, ZEERO Events, and ZEERO 360. Adam, I'll start with you if you don't mind. So what are the main challenges that you are seeing with customers when it comes to reporting?
Thank you. Very good to be here. Just to say a little bit more about me and my company Junxion, that's Junxion. We have been working for over 30 years in the field of social impact and sustainability as strategy advisors and partners for impact to our corporate and NGO clients across the world. We're headquartered in Canada and the UK, and I run our London office and serve as our Chief Impact Officer, as you said, Terry, to our clients, to whom I try to be a critical friend. I also sit on the regional standards advisory body here for B Corp in the UK, helping to develop those new standards, and I'm a fellow of the RSA, the Royal Society of Arts. Great to be with you all. Just to get to that first question, the challenges that we find when we're helping companies communicate about supply chain, it's very uneven, the information that they have. That's, I think, the first thing to say. So it's also complex. They also lack a degree of influence, and quite often there's a lack of integration across the reporting entity. So to take those in turn, the unevenness of the information, quite often we find that a company will, perhaps not have done a full assessment of impact across their whole value chain, or if they have, they don't know in an even way what those impacts are. So for example, they might know about the carbon emissions of some of their raw materials, but not all of them. Or they might know a lot about their carbon emissions, but very little about the impacts of their water use. Let's say if they're a drinks company, for example. And of course, both of those are, material impacts, but the degree, the level of information they have about each of those impact is very rarely consistent, which means telling a kind of consistent story about how they're managing the supply chain impacts is difficult, because with uneven information comes uneven action, with uneven action comes uneven impact. So distilling, how this company is doing on managing its supply chain impacts is itself complicated. I think the other thing to say about this whole area is it is in itself complicated, by which I mean the way that companies source, they don't have two suppliers in one country. They have hundreds of suppliers in dozens of countries. And those are only their direct sourcing relationships. They'll have indirect sourcing relationships where they go through agents or licensees, and they'll know even less about data that sits behind those sourcing or procurement processes. And then again, they might even, in a multinational business, we can often find there's local market production. So for example, Global will have set a standard about how to source, but France will just say, no, we just got to crack on and get some stuff. So then again, how much information is actually shared and how much of the processes or principles of procurement applied evenly across sourcing. And again, understanding the data, getting to the heart of that is very difficult. Influence, the third point. It can be quite difficult to communicate to, you and me, the man in the street, that even a massive multinational business might have very limited influence with some of its core suppliers. So they might be surprised to know that a major sporting goods company, for example, we've done lots of work with those, Adidas, Intersport, and others, they might be responsible for less than 5% of a factory's output. So the degree to which they can bring influence to bear on how that factory does its business, on how that supplier applies, so let's say Intersport or Adidas's code of conduct, can be tricky for them. And then I think the fourth area that's really difficult is integration or the lack of it. So you might have a sustainability team over here and you might have a sourcing team over there. Are those two teams really talking to each other? Are the sustainability credentials and reports and audits built into the sourcing team's way of doing business? Are those genuinely part of the contracting process? Are those, requirements for sourcing, or are they just things they consider? So I think all of those are complexities and challenges in communicating supply chain impacts.
Now, when you are working with clients and in different markets, in different industries, how do you help them navigate the complexity?
Well, you have to, we say one of our values at Junxion is to be generous, by which we mean principally to meet people where they are, right? But we're also courageous, which means we want to challenge them to do the right thing for people and planet. And so we try and get those, if you like, bring our values to them in the right balance. But absolutely it starts with meeting them where they are. So, a less mature reporter or a company that's challenged by having this unevenness of information from multiple markets, I always say the best thing to do is to share that dilemma. Now, quite often reporting companies get nervous about saying, we don't know, or we're not sure if, or we think this is the way, but we are testing this out. I actually think that's misplaced. I think for the most part, readers respond really warmly to authentically sharing challenges in this space. I think it's certainly any experienced reader or an analyst, activist, or academic, the three A's, as I call them, of the expert readership of sustainability reports, they know it's complex. They're not expecting it to be a straightforward story. In fact, they would be skeptical of a company that said, we know everything there is to know about our suppliers' impacts, and it's all fine. I mean, it's just not credible. So we're very much about meeting people where they are, understanding that complexity that they face, and finding a way of sharing that complexity, that unevenness of information, with their readership, with the stakeholders they're reporting to, in a way that they're comfortable with. Now, clearly, that should come with some commitment to get better, right? And this is where reporting and strategy kind of become bedfellows, because I might be advising a company to say, well, it doesn't look great if all you can say is, we don't know very much. What are you going to do about that? And at that point, you're starting to, tail wag the dog a little bit. You're starting to say, don't you think your strategy should include deeper audits or more audits or, in-country visits or whatever is necessary to get that next level of information? And those are the parts of the process that I really enjoy, because that's where I think reporting is not only about transparency to externally to stakeholders, it's also about internally, management and leadership understanding where they're at and having enough information and enough sometimes pressure from people like me to course correct.
Because that's a difficult balance, right? The profit versus the purpose, the people versus the planet. And when you're getting clients coming to you saying, we want to do good, but we need to make profit. How do you handhold them through that?
Well, no question. And listen, for almost all companies everywhere are run by good people who are stuck in a bad system. I mean, I think we've all come across the occasional psychopath who's leading a corporate entity, but for the most part, they're just good people trapped in a bad system. And I think we have to meet them in those terms, by which I mean they don't want to go home at night having, knowing that there are abuses in their supply chain that they're not doing anything about. Why would they want to look their teenage children in the eyes and say, I decided not to, I don't know, pay our suppliers a living wage this week, darling? No one wants to do that. But it's a journey, and you have to help companies understand that they they need to have a vision of what good looks like in mind, and they need to be working towards it. I think certainly in this space around suppliers, I think a problem I see a lot is that most companies don't really have a picture of success in their mind. And so I encourage them to have a picture of success in their mind. I worked for a long time as a consultant to Adidas, and they were very clear that what they wanted was self-governance in their supply chain. They wanted to work with their suppliers to the point where their best suppliers were, as it were, applying the principles of Adidas's own code of conduct without Adidas being there, if you like.
Mhm.
That sort of degree of integrity. And so they had a very clear vision of where they wanted to get their supply chain to, and that helped them take the necessary steps. I think very few companies have that clarity of vision. So again, we help them to try and do that. And in that way, I think companies can feel confident that they're taking steps towards a goal that is supportable, meaningful, and in line with their personal and professional values.
Thank you. So could you touch a little bit more on that around the importance of supplier engagement with your customers and how Worldly manages that?
Sure. Thank you, Terry. And by the way, great to be here. Thank you for asking me. So I was really kind of aligning to what Adam was just talking about. I'll start by telling you a little bit about Worldly because it'll provide context for my response. So Worldly is a leading supply chain intelligence platform for sustainability and consumer goods. And when I say sustainability, obviously that's both environmental, but also social and labor sustainability. And what we're really focused on doing at Worldly is creating a lot of insight at the facility level, so the factory level that's actually doing the production of these products, not just tier one, but upstream as well, but also quantifying environmental and social and labor impacts at the unit of production level, at the product level as well. So that's kind of the two areas where we're focused. And Adam talking about inconsistency in companies' ability to report really resonates with me because where we sit at Worldly, we work with over 40,000 retailers, brands, and suppliers, and we kind of sit between the brands and retailers and their suppliers. And ultimately, what our platform represents is an ecosystem where these companies come together and collaborate and share data and make decisions together and commit to collective action together. So that's what we're driving at Worldly. Our core has been in apparel in the past, but we're across all consumer goods now with a heavy focus on luggage and bags, home furnishings, outdoor sporting goods, apparel, footwear, toys, those types of things. So, in our work, um, what we find, and I'm not going to say anything that's new news to anybody. Obviously, 90+% of carbon emissions for consumer goods companies are in their supply chain, right? Not within their own four walls. So obviously, getting their suppliers to engage in the right ways is absolutely critical, not just to understanding impact, but also to taking the right action and addressing that impact. So a big part of what we do is driving that engagement, and we've gotten very, very good at it. So typically, when we're working with a brand or a retailer trying to engage their supply chain, we'll have north of 75% engagement across their supply chain, which is very, very high compared to most. And typically what we see is 10, 15, maybe 20% engagement outside of kind of the system that we've developed. And the reason I think what we do works so well is not just because we've been doing it for years and years and years, and we've developed a kind of a methodology and approach, but the main reason is we're aligned to a standard, the Higg Index. The Higg Index was developed years ago as a standardized methodology to understand and gain insight into supply chain sustainability issues across energy, water usage, chemical usage, working conditions, that sort of thing. So there's kind of a series of assessments that can be taken. And the reason I think standardization is so important is because, frankly, In the absence of standardization, the system is broken. And what I mean by that is on average, suppliers, and this is inclusive of like small and medium-sized suppliers, are spending 200 days per year in audits, right? They have over 40 certifications every year they have to deal with, a huge number of assessments. And those audits are coming both from their customers as well as governments, where they're located, and it's absolutely overwhelming. So, when they do an assessment with us, on average, they reshare, they'll provide the data one time and then share it 5 times with 5 other customers. So that reduces that audit and assessment fatigue for them. But the other thing we're really focused on is driving that collaboration I was talking about. Because historically, when we've talked about supplier engagement, it's really been about provide us with data so we can get visibility into what's going on at your facility, so that we can make decisions. When I say we, I mean the brand or the retailer, about what you should do to improve the situation. That is not a good system. It's not equitable, doesn't actually work at all, because there's an absence of shared incentives there. So what we're focused on is providing analytics and insights and intelligence on both sides, on the supplier side. So they're not just providing data, they're getting output from that data. And then they're owning that data and deciding who to share it with, and then collaborating with their brand and retailer customers to make decisions that make sense for everybody, that help that brand or retailer achieve any goals that they have that they're trying to achieve, but also help the supplier find ways to create efficiency, reduce waste, increase their exposure and their opportunities to develop new business, things like that for the supplier. So there has to be shared incentives on all sides to do this work. Now, when I say that, I might be making it sound like suppliers aren't kind of naturally incentivized to do the right thing. They absolutely are. If anything, where most of these factories are located, they're dealing with the impacts of climate change more than just about anybody. So they're already very focused on climate adaptability. So they have natural incentives to do the work. But still, the system has to improve because too often it's mandates and dictates about what should be done. Just as an example, I was recently in Cambodia and I visited a lot of our supplier customers in Cambodia. And a theme I heard consistently, especially at small factories, was, we recently had some of our customers come to us and say, we have to start installing solar because we have to start moving to renewable energy. And these factory owners were like, that makes zero sense for us. Where we're located, the grid cannot support solar. So there's really no incentive for us to do this, but there are other things that we can do. For example, we have a boiler that we can upgrade, but we need access to financing to do that. There are other things that we can do. So just letting them have autonomy, agency, and an opportunity to collaborate with their customers to make good decisions about how to drive change is what we think is absolutely critical.
You touched on the increasing stakeholder expectations and obviously increased regulation.
Yeah.
So how do you advise your customers? How do you support your customers in getting ahead of that in their different countries?
Yeah, so the best way to get ahead of it is get specific. And by get specific, I mean deepen your understanding of what's actually happening in your supply chain. Obviously, there's a lot of complexity. Adam was talking about this in supply chains. I mean, we have customers who have thousands of suppliers across the planet in various regions. And it's a mix, obviously, of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers that they have. It's everything from very large manufacturers that have a lot of resources and their own sustainability teams, down to very small kind of mom and shop types of operations. So how do you, again, kind of get specificity within that? Again, we believe the answer to that is standard methodology that lightens the burden on your suppliers so that they can actually provide you with the data, but then also coming to the table with a willingness to collaborate and work closely with them. So if you can do that, what you'll do is you'll get that engagement, you'll get the data, and then the right intelligence and analytics to be able to really understand what's happening in your supply chains so that you can start to get ahead and get prepared. We talk about compliance readiness a lot with our customers all the time. And as much as, it's interesting with, CSRD and CSDDD and digital product passport coming, there's been a lot of noise lately about, hey, there's kind of a pulling back on regulation and a watering down. And while that's definitely true in some ways, what we're finding is most of our customers are very, very much thinking in the longer term. And they're like, this is very temporary. These regulations are coming. And yes, while they might be being softened right now, it's inevitable that they will continue to harden over time. So we better get prepared. And frankly, the ones that we see doing the best job of getting ahead are really looking at their kind of preparation as a way not just to prepare for regulation, but to compete more effectively as well and to get ahead of their competition because of their awareness that what is coming is inevitable, and it will have to be addressed. So they know that they're also building competitive advantage for themselves, not just to achieve sustainability goals, but also to create efficiencies within their supply chains, minimize risk, create more opportunity for climate adaptability, to reduce the chances of disruption, but also to tell better stories about their products and their production and how they're doing the right thing for people and the planet.
So I'm hearing preparedness, education is crucial. In the
Yeah.
circular economy, how do we connect climate impact and sourcing in the circular economy?
Yeah, it's a good question. So sourcing obviously plays a critical role. And I'm about to speak in some generalities here. That what I'm about to say is not universally true, but it is generally true. And again, Worldly sits in this unique position of being between kind of brands, retailers, and their suppliers. So we get to observe a lot of what goes on and the dynamic that's at play there. And very often when we're bringing in new customers, especially, and their supply chain partners, there's a lot of unraveling that has to happen. So part of what we see, and again, I'm speaking in generalities here, is sustainability teams at these brands working with their suppliers and working with them to drive improvement and reduce impact. Again, across energy usage, water consumption, waste management, chemical usage, all kinds of things. So that's happening, and they're pushing them to make investments, frankly, implement these new processes, upgrade this equipment, right? Do those kinds of things. Meanwhile, sourcing teams are under a lot of pressure and highly incentivized to squeeze those very same suppliers for lower and lower prices. That is a non-starter for the suppliers. Again, I spend a lot of time talking to our supplier customers, and one of the things I hear consistently from them is Jay, there has to be a greater understanding that part of sustainability is financial sustainability. We have to be able to continue to exist while we're doing the right thing for our customers and our people and the planet. So this dynamic between sustainability and sourcing is absolutely critical. And when I think about, circular economy, it's really, circularity is essentially about breaking the link between scaling and growth and resource use. And what that means is having that level of visibility where you can understand how to make better decisions about production, right? Lower impact production, lower impact materials, lower impact design that minimizes waste. And in order to be able to do that, you have to be collaborating effectively with your suppliers to do that. And frankly, the procurement and sourcing decisions cannot only be about quality and price over time. Sustainability has to become more and more of a factor. And again, we believe that that's not only the right thing to do, but it also helps businesses more effectively manage risk as well for their business over time.
Thank you. Nico, I'm going to ask you about the circular economy and what ZEERO is doing to help decarbonize efforts in the hospitality industry and more broadly.
Okay, sure. Hi, Terri. Hi, guys, and pleasure to be here. And thank you for inviting me too. I've got to first of all just say that I totally agree with what these guys are working on. And Jay, it just is music to my ears to hear standardization because our business has always really been focused more on the travel sector. And we have something like 36 different types of calculators that people have dreamt up and then they go and get them confirmed and it's like it's just basically trying to make money rather than actually trying to invest in what's actually going to make the difference. So we actually offer our calculators. We're an end-to-end solution. ZEERO Group basically has the 360 side, which is the software side. So we give corporations the tools they need, which use standards, which are globally approved standards. Because, like you're saying, if you can't actually, if you're using, say you've got a supply chain and everybody uses if you all go and you meet in one location and everybody uses a different carbon calculator for your trip, it's like you could be the two companies coming from the same place on the same flights, but your emissions are not even comparable. So that's the starting point. But the thing is that we do live on a planet, we do use carbon, and so having gone through the sort of like carbon credit side of business where we actually provide carbon credits, we decided that we wanted to take it a step further and build something tangible. So we created ZEERO Energies, which is our biofuel side. Now, being focused on travel, we decided to look at destinations and how our product could actually help destinations. And we always look at the supply chain to begin with. So when we look at making aviation fuel sustainable or marine fuel sustainable, we don't agree with things that will suck loads of energy from one sector just to make the other sector look good. And that's something that's actually quite alarming sometimes when you look at hydrogen that takes 9 liters of fresh water to make 1 liter of hydrogen, and that has a very low energy density and takes a lot of energy to convert it, because essentially what you're doing is you're putting energy in to pull the H2O, the water molecules, apart so that they can be pushed back together when they're burnt. That's all it is. But you're not going to break that requirement for energy to make that happen. Similar thing with things like air carbon capture, where you're running machines that suck loads of air through the atmosphere to try to condense the carbon dioxide to then either bury it or turn that into fuels as well. Now, the amount of energy that takes, even if it's green energy, that green energy could be used better elsewhere. And who really wants loads of machines all over the planet? So our solution is something called hydrothermal liquefaction. And the way we're doing this is we've put this together as a kind of like, we call it public-private partnerships. So what we do is we go to destinations and we will install our hydrothermal liquefaction plants. And they basically take the waste and they process wastewater into biofuels. The process takes 15 minutes. It's the most efficient system that's out there. It has a high energy density because you actually get crude oil at the end of it, but it's a bio crude that is low carbon, and it's a circular fuel. So it's basically coming through the food chain, through consumption, and then the waste is being dealt with. So we're reducing landfill by 90% as well. Then we've got the low carbon fuel. Now, Terry, you asked about hospitality. Now, hotels are all over the world. And when do we use hotels? When we travel there. So if there are regulations, which there are coming in, that mean that if airlines or shipping or anything are not using renewable energy, that they will have fines. They either need to invest now to produce that renewable energy, and why not use waste that nobody wants anyway to create that fuel, or you have to pay the fines, and that is going to end up going onto the consumer. Now, if you have higher ticket prices, or this is, I guess, this is part of a hotel looking at its supply chain outside of its food and services. It's the supply chain of its clients. So if its clients can't afford to travel because fuel now for aircraft is, instead of being $600 a ton, it's $4,000 a ton, that's going to be a huge impact on the price of the ticket. that's going to hold people back from traveling. Businesses will cut back on travel because of expense. People will take fewer holidays and they'll go back to the longer trips from the shorter breaks. And the thing is that so this is something that this is our planet, and a little bit like talking about supply chain, we're all responsible. And we're all responsible. So we all have to share responsibility. But it's also our focus that if you're sharing a responsibility and you're getting engaged in this, you should own your energy future. So what we're doing with destinations is we process their waste in partnership with hotels, in partnership with aviation, in partnership with cruise, and in partnership with the travelers themselves and travel companies who sell those trips. So it means that everybody can collaborate, and then we can install these plants, which then actually self-fund themselves because we get paid for the waste management and we get paid for the fuel that we produce. And those fuels can be put into any regular engines. These are all important things. There's no point actually producing a new method of working where you have to change an infrastructure. I know that like in Europe and the US, we've sort of like done quite well with electric vehicles, rolling out electric vehicles. But a lot of the electricity produced is not actually as green as we'd like to think it is. The lithium batteries still have waste assigned to it, and there's still other issues that are not being resolved through the creation of these machines. But more importantly, you go to countries like Africa or the Far East. If you go to Asia, you go to like some of the islands like Indonesia, and people are riding around on 20-year-old mopeds. These guys, or they're driving 20-year-old vans that don't even have paint on them anymore. And they put their LED lights underneath to make them look cool, but they're not going to be able to afford to buy an electric vehicle. And the country doesn't have the infrastructure to provide the electricity to charge those vehicles. So when we look at one of these projects, we look at it like you're looking at it from start to finish. What is the right solution for the location? How much benefit are we bringing to the location? And how can we engage with the location and with the people who are reliant on that location being there, which can be the travel agents, it can be the cruise lines, it can be the airlines, and it can be the hotels. And the destinations can only benefit from that.
Can I ask the partnerships and supplier engagement piece? I know you've got some exciting announcements and partnerships. How important is that to meeting climate emissions and climate goals?
It's huge. I mean, the biggest problem with sustainability is that, it was brought up in the conversation earlier, is about how do you mix profit and planet. So the thing that we're doing is by mixing waste and fuel, our fuels are actually coming out at the same price as fossil fuel. So that's very unusual to have a biofuel at the same price as a fossil fuel. Now, the thing is that might not be the case, because if there are advantages that we can get, which means that we can snowball investment into further projects and we can decarbonize faster, we're going to do that. But the fact is that our margin is not going to be because the process is expensive. It's going to be because we want to actually build more of these so that we can actually achieve more. Sorry, Terry, could you repeat what you just asked?
Your partnerships, you've got a few exciting partnerships that you want.
Yeah, well, the thing is that we do what's called blended funding, because the funding of sustainable projects, like you spoke about the boiler in the factory in Cambodia, the thing is that if you can't fund it yourself, but you can actually join together and collaborate with the different elements that I mentioned on that journey of a passenger's journey, kind of going to a destination. If you can actually fund it by everybody making a tiny climate contribution as part of the funding, then you de-risk the whole operation. So the local community might pay something into it. The government might pay something into it. The climate contributions might pay something into it. We can get fuel offtake deals. We can get waste offtake deals, which we can then use to claim bank finance. So it secures bank finance. It gives the bank something, some safety net. for giving the projects loans. So we use all of this blended funding. So no one sector is kind of like lumbered with it, but the partnerships are the most important part of it. And it is actually quite enlightening to see this waking up now. It has been a sleeping monster, but now that it's waking up and things are moving forwards, it's actually really nice to see how this tangible solution is comes to life. I've actually received the first oil sample here in Europe today, so I got very excited this morning. So the thing is that you basically have to consider everything, but also you have to also consider that if we were to take bank finance for one of the plants, we probably wouldn't get it if it was on its own. If we were to just take climate contributions, it would be slow. So it would mean that we would take a long time before we can deliver anything. But by bringing it all together and by collaborating, we actually can make a difference. And also, it means that tourism brings a positive to that destination. And it means that the whole supply chain are involved in making that destination better.
Thank you. I realise we've got a few more minutes left, so I'm going to ask each of you a question around what the future looks like for tackling scope emissions. And also, if I may, we've got COP30 on the horizon in November. And what do you expect? What would you like to see? What would you expect to see coming from that? Two different things, maybe. So, Adam, I'll start with you.
Well, I mean, without wishing to sound too doomy and gloomy, I think things are going to get worse before they get better in the short run. I think we've all expressed the kind of complexity. We're all very well aware, of course, that the kind of political logic of the day is kind of going in the wrong direction. Although, as Jay eloquently pointed out, the sort of the long arc of history is bending in the right direction. So I think in the short term, it's going to be bumpy. And I think what we've seen is, there's a bit of timidity by corporate leaders, and I'd rather see some boldness. I think there are examples of companies out there who who recognize that given the kind of current kind of economic logic of quarterly returns and so on, that they need to work super hard at telling the story of how their business models, how the changes they're making are aligned with planetary boundaries and ethical norms, like the state of the planet and what people actually expect companies to do. And I think it's telling that story really well that we need our leaders to step up a bit more. There are good companies out there doing that. Like Natura in Brazil, for example, the cosmetics giant, I think, do a great story of that. Patagonia is an obvious one. There are others. I'd like to see more of that. I'm not sure how much I will. In terms of COP, I am rather afraid that it's caught up in this kind of current sort of short-term thinking. And as Al Gore has eloquently pointed out himself, there's a reasonable argument to say that the COP process is pretty broken. And I guess my wish for it would be, as it were, for a bit of navel gazing at COP, for the gathering to take a sort of good hard look at the difference it's making and the way it tries to make a difference, and maybe reinvent some of the rules that I think are holding the COP process back from being all it could be.
Thank you. Jay?
I was on mute. Sure. As far as the future of tackling scope emissions, I really think, and I guess it depends on how you define the future, right? How far out you're looking. But ultimately, I'm hopeful and I believe it will be about precision, collaboration, and then collective action, right? And by precision, I mean, well, I should say precision and accountability, moving past broad estimates, for example, at the product level, moving back, the kind of binary approach of either like full life cycle assessments, which are way too time consuming and expensive to do for kind of a full product portfolio, to just spend-based estimates, to actually getting into real collaboration between brands and their suppliers to really identify what's actually going on and how to tackle it together. I really believe that that's where we're going, where there's going to be shared incentives. It's all of what I was talking about before. I'm an optimist. I think, I talked about the Higg Index before. Rick Ridgway, who is the head of sustainability at Patagonia, and was one of the founders of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition and the Higg Index. I get to spend a lot of time with him, and he is infinitely optimistic as a human being. So I think it's kind of rubbing off on me. So I'm optimistic that we're going to see good collaboration. And what's interesting to me is right now in this kind of moment of a lot of trade issues and geopolitical uncertainty and strife, one of the things we are observing is a lot of our brand and supplier customers coming together and working much more closely together to figure out how are we going to get through this together, right? And those negotiations can be brutal at times because there are a lot of negotiations happening, but it's also deepening the understanding on both sides of the real issues that both sides are having. So I'm hopeful that that'll be a catalyst for even deeper collaboration and figuring out how to move forward in a more equitable way. As far as COP30, again, I think there's going to be a lot of talk about geopolitical issues, and hopefully, once we're able to move past that the focus will be on action. And equitable action. I agree. It's time to move past kind of commitments and broad kind of commitments to, again, accountability and action and hopefully equitable action. I also think kind of given where it is and some of the issues that are coming up, that hopefully things like forestry and indigenous people will be a big part of the conversation. And I know that there's a lot of focus on bringing in different cultural perspectives and ethics, because I really do think that's the only way we can move forward, because it has to be collaborative. It has to make sense for everybody, how we address the challenges going forward. So I'm hopeful that will be a big part of it. Just, again, a really heavy focus on action. So that's what I'm hopeful for. What I think is going to happen is a lot of talk about geopolitical issues that hopefully we'll be able to kind of extract ourselves from and move forward. Yeah.
Thank you. And Nico?
So I think that at the moment, a lot of this is voluntary. So a lot of calculating, a lot of investment is voluntary. Regulations are coming. The smart ones are getting their houses in order now. And the smarter ones will actually start investing into projects that can actually help them decarbonize in a real manner. Those who don't will be left behind. They will end up paying high fines. I do see that it is not just me saying it, it is coming. And even for US companies, even if the current administration state that they're not going to accept this or that or the other, they're only about, I don't know how much of the world it is, but it's a tiny percentage of the world as the US. They've got a lot of money, but that seems to be slipping away at the moment. So I think they're going to have to come in line. A US airline flying into Europe will not be able to avoid European regulations. And I feel that it also, to win this, it's going to take a bit of everything. It's going to take a bit of reporting. It's going to take a bit of measuring. It's going to take a bit of MyFuel. It's going to take a bit of solar. It's going to take a bit of wind power. It's going to take a bit of nuclear. But it's going to take all of us to make it all happen. So once we actually start to change our mindset, which I'm hoping will happen, or I see it is happening, I think that we've got a chance of actually achieving this. So I'm optimistic. As far as COP30 is concerned, I spoke at COP29. I was asked to speak at COP30. I booked my tickets and I cancelled. And I decided I wasn't going to go because the location, people around the hotels are so expensive. So a Radisson, when I looked, that was usually $110 a night, was $5,000 a night. And people who are actually going to COP have actually started to buy local apartments and houses rather than staying in a hotel because it's cheaper. So that's now messing up the local housing market. So, it wasn't very well thought out. So I'm hoping that, like Adam said, I'm hoping they get themselves straight. They might need to rethink a few things, and take a step back and say, what are we doing? Are we actually achieving something or not? So that's my view.
Thank you all. Yeah, I'm hearing optimism, but it might be a bumpy road while we get there. Equitable action and moving forward, don't get left behind. So thank you all. We've got New York Climate Week this week, halfway through. Look forward to raising a glass with some of you who will be in the offices at Fin Partners later today. And yes, thank you again.
Thank you. See you later.
Terri.
Thank you.
Adam, good to see you.
Bye-bye.